Hey, we all have hectic lives, and buying or selling a home can just make things even more of a chaotic mess. If you are moving to the Austin area, what would you need to get comfortable with that decision? Even if you lived in town and you needed to purchase or sell a home, how would you want to be treated? Chris Ott with the Ott Group of Keller Williams Realty has been a longtime friend and was the guy who I worked with to find the perfect property solution for me. I wanted a professional with knowledge of the Austin area to help me with my home search, navigate the paperwork, and negotiate on my behalf. And Chris Ott was the right agent for the job. Chris, his business partner, Teresa Ott Busseau, and their team of 5 agents have helped thousands of people move to and from the Austin area. The Ott family is celebrating over 35 years in business in Austin and plan to provide their real estate services for many more years to come. Their mantra is, your move matters, and that is what they focus on. Just go to their website at theottgroup.com and get connected with the Austin real estate team dedicated to taking care of you. That's THEOTT group.com. You can also call 512-222-6881 or email them at info@theottgroup.com to get connected with them today. Tell them that Stephen with the Parent Portal Show sent you and start working with a professional who is dedicated to your next move. Hey, welcome back to the Parent Portal Show. Another beautiful day outside Austin, Texas. It's been a great discussion already about some of the things happening in the NCAA, the start of the new year. We've all seen the final game with Michigan and University of Washington. Michigan definitely had that game in control pretty early. The opportunity, well, a lot of people question what the opportunity is going forward, right? And one of the things that's kind of interesting to explore and look at is the finances behind Michigan and University of Washington. And that'll explain a little bit of why some of the blow-ups going on with these teams and these conferences. Certainly puts some explanation behind the Pac-10 and the challenges that they ran into as things imploded a little bit. So just looking for a moment about the finances and with the two teams in this game. What's interesting that as you kind of compare notes, the Huskies actually spent a lot of money in several categories over Washington. Great article by Sportico this week in that comparison of these teams. And you saw that Washington had about 70.5 million in football expenses. It's crazy that those are the kind of numbers that we're talking about now with these programs. And that's just the football program. That's not the rest of the athletic program. Of course, that's going to be the big majority of the expenses anyway with any university program. Michigan only spent about 52.4 million. That was the budget for this year. So you show with these budgets, the Huskies only pulled in 91 million in football revenues only. That's a pretty healthy number, which gave them 20.5 million profit. And the Wolverines pulled in 131 mil, and that gave them 79 million profit. Those are some great numbers. Now, University of Texas has some interesting numbers there. I'll dip into that a little bit. Well, I'll go ahead and tell you their numbers for revenues in 2023. I think they garnished 239 million from 2021, the 2021-22 football season. So absolutely a ton of revenues, and they have the number one donation program in the country, and I believe that number is at almost 80 million, 71 million, I think is the number I saw on that. So there's a lot of big money behind UT's program. Their operating expenses were only 51.5 million. So bringing in 162 million in revenue is that's huge numbers, and that's it's now you start to understand why some of these changes are occurring behind the scenes. Media rights. You saw that the Big Ten had a $7 billion program, and that's why you see that Washington has decided to stay with that lucrative revenue machine over their conference that was just struggling on figuring out what the media rights were going to be. Donations, Michigan had $30.7 million in donation. Washington just had 19.2. Ticket sales, absolutely interesting, the numbers on ticket sales. Michigan's been number 2 in the country for the last 4 years. In 2017, they were at right at 40 million. In 2018, they were a little over 45 million in ticket sales. In 2019, behind Ohio State, they were right at 50 million. And then in 2021, they came down a little bit, 47 million. So anyway, these are numbers that are obviously a lot of revenues, make up for a lot of issues. It takes care of a lot of problems. Harbaugh was the 12th highest paid coach in the programs last year, 8.3 million. The Huskies' whole staff was paid 8.4 million. So that might give you some understanding what's going on there. Counting Harbaugh and the staff, Michigan paid 16.4 million out in salaries. So big dollars. You've heard the coaches complain about having to pay for $1 million or $2 million for getting a top quarterback. I find that very frustrating when these guys are making amazing money. Granted, they're talking about the bottom line success that they're trying to reach. So I get it. If they're going to run a program like that, they need to get, they have to have the monies to find the talent that they need to win. So in that self-interested approach that coaches have, they are going to whine and moan about the costs of paying players to come play for them. Around the travel, Michigan spent about 2.2 mil. Huskies spent 1.9 million. Huskies travel costs are going to probably go up next year since they're going to be traveling a little bit more with the Big Ten. Uniforms, Washington spent $3 million. Michigan spent $7.1 million. That's a lot of money. Crazy that kind of money is getting paid on uniforms and supplies and equipment. But that's the investments these teams kind of do. Student athlete meals, Wolverine spent $3.5 million. Ohio State kind of led that category again this year, but anyway, overall, the number one school in this year as far as budgets this year being 21-22. Let's make sure we're all clear about this. The 2023 numbers haven't come out yet, or haven't been published or shared, and those numbers obviously in the middle of a year, 23-24. They're not going to have a final recap of that until later, but the number one school was Alabama, 78.5, but their budget was 78.5 million in 21-22. Washington was the second highest budget. So they had a lot of monies that they were spending. Texas came all the way in at 13 with a $51.6 million budget. So, there's some discrepancies and some cost considerations that go on there that I think are important to think about as we're talking about equity in the programs, costs. It's a pent up pressure, and since money drives these choices, these decisions that these colleges are going to be making, it's important to understand, some of the challenges these schools are faced with. So, well, that's enough of that. It certainly is interesting to understand what schools are looking at, but I'd like to talk about kind of an interesting article. Sportico, Will Leach had a great article about the end of college football as we know it. So looking at the last game being done, it is going to change. There's no doubt about it. Now that Michigan has kind of completed and won the national championship, the world of college football as we know it is going to change. It's going to change pretty dramatically. It's going to be, on one hand, it's going to be kind of interesting. I think there's a lot of positives with this. Will Leach may be a little more cynical than I am today. Check back with me tomorrow. But he covered some pretty good points. He's a CNN guest writer. Covered some points about how the game's going to change, and I agree with him on some points. Obviously Washington, UCLA, USC, Oregon are all going to be joining the Big Ten, and that's a good thing. It's a bad thing that a Power 5 conference blew up. There's a lot of pain for that to happen, and that conference had been around for a long time. So for that to just all of a sudden overnight implode, you kind of wonder what's going to happen. Well, honestly, it is some of the shifting dynamics of college football right now. And it also speaks to how little power the NCAA and really even the commissioners have in some of the market forces that are pushing universities and television rights and brands and athletes and decisions made around the game of football. There's not one person that you can point to who's causing this. I think Charlie Baker, again, I'll throw a lot at his feet because he is the guy at the top of the food chain with the NCAA, but he's limited, and he's trying to do what's best for his member organizations, which isn't always best for the game. So we got Washington, UCLA, USC, and Oregon are going to join the Big Ten. Oklahoma and Texas are going to join the Southeast Conference. The college football playoff, as we all know, is going to expand to 12 teams. I think that's a great thing. I think it's been needed. It should have been 12 teams at first, but that's fine. We'll start with 12 teams. It won't stop there. I have some thoughts around that. And, of course, the Pac-12. What I said Pac-10 earlier. Pac-12. It's Pac-2 is what it ended up being, I guess. The Pac-2 is going to die. And it was founded in 1915. And that's just craziness that a well-established program like that is changing. But it's okay. We go through change. Change is a good thing. Change is important to evolve. And that is a good evolution for college football. So Leach goes into, hey, what does it teach us? What did 2023 teach us? And some of the lessons. And one of his first big things is that TV executives are the new commissioners, and they're now going to run everything. I don't agree with that. I think TV executives are important. I think they understand the branding, the marketing. I know they're being hired into these college football programs. Florida took it on the nose pretty hard. They're certainly hurting because of their role in the ACC. And a lot of people want to say that if they were more mindful of what it took to schedule their games and the teams that they needed to play or get out of the ACC earlier, they may have been at the final table as an SEC team. And that's probably legit. That's if they had been an SEC team, they probably would have been the team that got selected. But unfortunately for them, this was just not their year. It wasn't going to happen. So anyway, TV executives getting involved. I mean, they've been involved for quite some time. They've had a lot of opinion and a lot of influence on the game. TV in of itself, it is what drives the revenue. So there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have any problems with that idea. I don't think they run it. I think the institutions actually need to be kicked around a little bit. I think a lot of these big conferences and these big teams have to start thinking more along the lines of what is good for the constituency, which is good for the community, which is good for the alums, which is good for the fans who watch it on TV. Thank you that now the Longhorns Network is getting blown up so that I can watch my football games. That's what I want. Now, some people say, well, the games that aren't important won't get shown. Probably not. In other words, that probably isn't the case. An SEC game is going to have a lot of weight, and Texas playing in an SEC game is going to get watched. There's no doubt about it. But it's not the Longhorn Network that I got to pay money to go watch my Longhorns play football. That you want to start a little bit of an issue with me and my Longhorns. That was kind of a challenge for me. So advertising kind of derives some decision making. I don't have a problem with it at all. Is it going to run over some of the things important to the game? Well, I think those pressures were there all along. I don't know if that's, what's going to be fair and what's going to be considered fair. We'll get into that a little bit as we talk about the playoffs and what that's going to look like. But I think for the most part, I think it'll be fine. Brand name competition is going to be big. It always has been. Alabama playing Texas was big. It is an important game. Texas playing OU is big. Those are big, important games. Rivals happen, and Texas A&M and Texas playing, that's a big game. Michigan and Ohio State, that's what still has the joy in the game a little bit. The alums get involved. Are we becoming a version of the NFL? The allegiance to a specific school? I don't know. I think there's still an element of college football that will be more I think people will stay loyal, probably even more so, to their teams, even if they are losing, than some people are toward some of the NFL teams. I don't know. There's some pretty diehard Packer fans. I get it. There's some pretty diehard Cowboy fans, but I think the opportunity to say, hey, I went to school there, I'm proud of this team. It's the smaller colleges that will suffer a little bit, but they'll still have a built-in community of people who went to that school who will still support their schools. SMU is doing just fine. They're very happy at the moment. How they're going to shake out, that'll be interesting. And I'll have some more thoughts on that too. Are additional conferences on the horizon? The demise of different conferences on the horizon? Absolutely possible. Yeah, Big 12 is kind of an interesting place. It's probably outside of the Power 4, Big 12 conference probably has one of the strongest footholds. ACC is going to suffer. They're going to struggle and to be relevant. There's this theory that we're headed to an East Coast versus West Coast lineup, just kind of like the NFL, AFC, and NFC. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. And can you line it up within the conferences to kind of create those? Could be, and I think that would be kind of fun and interesting. So I wouldn't get too concerned about that. I think that conferences will continue to change. Schools will try to figure out their spots. I don't think the little schools suffer as greatly as some people are talking about. Do they become minor league programs? Could be. That's very realistic.
But do they become relevant? And I think the relevancy becomes the Cinderella story. If you think about the playoff system, um, now all of a sudden you have a school that wasn't expected to play through and win all the way up to the top, and they very potentially could. We've seen that in the NCAA basketball playoffs, and it's fun. It's exciting to see some of those Cinderella teams go through. So I don't think everything's doom and gloom with us creating an Eastern and Western conference. I think there's some real value, and I think it'll provide some infrastructure and some stability. That's kind of one of the problems that you would have to talk about over the last 18, 24 months. Just hadn't had as much stability on who's doing what next year and how all these things are working out. And, the craziness of the transfer portal, the craziness of the NCAA NIL rules, and kids jumping everywhere this year, it is hard to understand what is my team going to look like. And it just comes up absolutely evident in the bowl games. The bowl games used to be the teams would show up, they'd play a great game. Sometimes it wasn't a great game, but the kids who played all year long were the kids that are out on the field. That is so not the case. Most of the athletes, the kids that carried that team into the bowl game, they sit on the sidelines because it's not worth the risk. And that is a pressure that I think we need to figure out. I don't think there's a solution to that yet either. I don't think I have one yet. I get a kid not wanting to get injured, but when does that happen? When does that transition of a kid not playing a final game? Hey, if you're not going to play one final game and you still think you're headed to the playoffs 6 months out, why don't you stop playing then and let the next quarterback step up? Let Johnny Smith, number 2, come on in and start building up his career and building up his opportunity to go play for the NFL. So somewhere in there, we've got to figure out the risk-reward trade-off of kids who are playing a bowl game, carrying a team to a bowl game, and their commitment to playing through it. And it's got to make sense for everyone involved. I think part of the problem, no one's that I've known, I haven't seen anybody speaking to the fact that there's a kind of a downtime, which I get is kind of around grades and end of semester kind of things, but there's a downtime that a lot of these kids are not keeping up their practices as much. I think there's a slide in performance, a slide of just where they are before they go off to a bowl game as far as physical fitness. And I think that is detrimental to players. And that's why you do see some of these kids get hurt when they go into a bowl game. So anyway, that brings us to some changes that I think are going to happen. Geography is no longer a determining factor. That was a little bit of a joke after a while anyway. Once, the whole idea of the conferences early on was to group schools that were in geographical areas to play against each other so that kids wouldn't have to be on a bus for, 22 hours to go play a school across town or across state or out of state or something like that. Nowadays with charter flights, it's pretty easy for the universities to get from point A to point B. Now that becomes a cost, and travel is a real cost, and that will impact smaller programs and smaller budgets. So that's where you may see some of these conferences that aren't the Power Four still have some validity because they do group geographically, and I think there might be some sense in that. Leach talks about big TV ratings will be, the big schools that get the big TV ratings will play on the biggest stage. And I'm fine with that. That's okay. But there's still the Cinderella story, and that will always be an aspect of the ratings and the TV. I mean, get the TV executives involved in that conversation. You're going to hear they're going to love that. That's the storylines. Those are the plots that they love to build up to a big bowl game or build up to the college football playoffs. So it's not all going to go away. It's not all going to be just the big power conferences playing for the championship. I think you'll see an element of the underdog. Everyone loves a good underdog story. So teams like Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, they'll be fine. We're going to be just fine. We're big programs. We have big budgets. We have big monies. I don't see any of the changes hurting any of those programs. As a matter of fact, I think they're going to benefit from it. Maybe a little too much. I think it's already kind of happening where these universities have been able to claw back a lot of the talent and pay a lot of the talent that they were wanting to pay 5 years ago. You know, they suffered when this equity attitude happened, parity in the system. You know, the universities would speak to it. They'd absolutely toe the party line, but at the end of the day, they didn't like it because they were losing out some of the kids that they could bring into their own program. But the programs that could suffer and will struggle are programs like Missouri, Kentucky, Purdue, Illinois, Arizona State, Kansas. I agree. I understand that. SMU, UNT, University of Texas, Permian Basin, UTPB, right back in Odessa, Texas. You know, they've just launched a Division I program. Some of these programs, you know, that's another thing that's been happening is we've seen a lot of these smaller schools start competing and stepping up into Division I, which I love because it gives them scholarships. They're able to, you know, support that. But how's that going to work out if you're, you know, in the bowls of your conference? If you're always at the bottom of you become the whipping dog of the conference, and that's why the smaller conferences play each other. You know, the smaller universities play each other at that kind of lower level. But if they can step in a Division I ranking, play a couple of the big guys, get some good time that they play into those programs and have a chance to get onto some TV time and have some stellar athletes. The only challenge there is unfortunately, they're probably going to lose some of those athletes. That is a problem. That is a challenge. And I don't have answers for that. A lot of kids are going to want to step through those programs, play a year or two at UNT or SMU, and then go right into if they're, you know, really that talented. Now they've been showcased. You know that these big schools are going to look at them pretty closely. The last point that I think was made, and I think it's actually a pretty good point. I hadn't thought of it quite in these terms, but college football video game, EA Sports, is going to change everything. And it will. It actually will. So, you know, if you remember, EA Sports was kind of what kicked all of this NIL off. The courts got involved. It was the game was stopped. They stopped the production back in 2013 because the Supreme Court had a decision that said players had a right to their NIL, their name, image, likeness, and that EA Sports could not use those those images, those kids' faces, and not get paid for it. And NCAA ended up on the wrong side of that issue. It's good that the kids had that opportunity to start getting some of those monies. So now we see EA Sports coming out this next year with the college football video game, and everyone's talking about it. And the NIL money that can be earned is awesome. I mean, Quinn Ewers is going to be amazing in that. Arch Manning will have probably a pretty premier spot in the NIL in the game, and a lot of kids are going to want to be Arch Manning. Heck, I want to be Arch Manning on EA Sports. Heck, I've never even have I played EA, probably a little bit a long time ago, but I'll probably want to go play it just to see what it's like to be Arch Manning. Woo, making me into a gamer. I got enough of those in this household, so I don't know how much I'll do that. But you know, now the players are getting monies for the game, and don't forget the schools will get licensing rights, the stadiums, the logos, the brands. They're all going to get monies out of this. So the brands will be putting money into it, but EA Sports obviously is going to be a very exciting impact on how those funds are distributed, what's going to who. Now, there's some crazy ideas. You know, I've heard of this in game tipping thing or financial compensation thing where kids could have a fund set up and get paid for a good play during the game. That's ridiculous, and I don't expect that to happen. And I would hope it wouldn't happen, because then you get into some serious challenges, I think, in just kind of enforcement. So Leach had a good point. FIFA got into and became a part of the EA Sports programs. They had that program that came through, and that really blew up the soccer program. Especially in the U.S., soccer became huge because kids could be their favorite soccer player. And Leach talks about all boats rising with the popularity of of this program, and I agree. I think it will be beneficial. I think it will build some interesting connectivity with kids who are wanting to come up and play sports. There's some bonding and some, it's just a different way for kids to kind of appreciate and enjoy the game, the game of football. So I think there's a lot of benefits to that. Here I'm gonna quote Will Leach. In many ways, college football has come to resemble a video game in recent years. I agree with that. I think he's right. Now the game will come back to return the favor. It was interesting because I was watching the Washington, Michigan University of Washington game, and there are times when the field just looked like this, almost like the stage. The lights were so bright, the turf was so green, everything was just so pretty. It's almost like you didn't want anybody to, sweat on it because it just looked so nice. And I think Leach makes a pretty good point that the game is going to come back to return the favor, and it comes full circle. In the words of that ancient English philosopher Elmer Fudd, "Oh, what a wicked web we weave." There you go. There's my Elmer Fudd imitation for the day. Impression. There you go. All right, so just kind of wrap things up. The sport has definitely reached kind of a, I don't know, he calls it an end of stage capitalism period. I don't know. I think it's just the next stage. I think we're going on into where money is more transparent. I think that's a good thing. I think kids get more of the share of what's going to be happening with the monies. I think that's a good thing. I don't see it as doom and gloom. I think things will be fine. Brands have been around for many years. I don't think it's going to warp kids. I think there will be transgressions that will happen, as there has every single year. We'll hear this year, I'm sure we'll hear about a contract that was illegal, or a kid gets ripped off or scammed out of the monies that you could have earned. And that's a bad thing, but those things happen anyway. So I don't think you can lay that at the feet of the changing of what's going to happen. I love the fact that we're going to 12 teams. Where does that stop? Are we going to stop with 12 teams? No. I think we ought to go. I think we ought to be at some point, you get into scheduling issues, but at some point in time, I think we ought to be at 64 teams. Maybe that's a little much, but really ought to have a lot of opportunity for teams to play and to try to pull this playoff program. The only difference between the NCAA basketball tournament and the football tournament is just the recovery time that football players need before they can play the next game. What makes basketball a much easier sport is they can play two games in a weekend and do just fine. Football, you can't do that. I don't think so. Maybe it'll change to the point that you can do that, but right now it seems like these teams, that would actually be an interesting question. They do it with 7-on-7s all the time. Can you play two games in a weekend? And if you can, then you've solved that problem. Maybe the risk is a little bit higher for some of the kids and injuries. But if you're building up enough on your bench, maybe you've got a kind of a game, a bench A and a bench B for the first and second games. And that might be an interesting approach. That would certainly make it would change it. I think I just came up with a great idea. I think we should be playing the college football playoffs. Should have 2 games over a weekend. You win, you play the next game the next day. Your quarterback got hurt or he's not ready to go. Bring in quarterback number 2. Wow, I'm gonna share that with some people. We'll see. All right, so hey, Michigan was not punished before the championship game. Leach gets into hey, the monies are the reason why Michigan was able to play in the national championship game. I don't know. I think NCAA always has been historically slow to hand out punishments. I don't think that's going to change. Hey, Houston Astros didn't get punished until after they'd won their championship. SMU national championship, they didn't get the death penalty until a year later, and those are bad stories. And we don't want cheating to be a part of the program. We don't want it to be tainted. But those things happen, and I think enforcement can still happen just fine. I don't think that there's so much money involved. No one likes a cheater. Just like everyone loves an underdog, no one wants to support a team that's cheating. Even Michigan fans, I guarantee you there are fans who say, man, I'm not happy with my team. I don't like it that they cheated. And donors get real anxious about donating to a program when they've been considered cheating going on. So there's market forces. There are marketplace forces that are involved when bad things happen to a team and when it's considered to be corrupt or the coaches aren't good coaches kind of attitude. I'm just as excited as anyone else about the 12 team college football playoff program next year. I think it'll be more interesting. I think you've got more questions on who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. I think a lot of schools will be pushing. Can we get up there instead of a 1-loss team? Maybe a 2-loss team gets in there. That'd be crazy interesting. Are there going to be forces and branding issues and conference power questions about who gets selected? Sure. That's going to be, until we get this all figured out, it's going to be a little bit of there's not a linear path on how this is going to end up where it needs to end up. But I think it'll be fun. I think a lot of people have a good time. So I don't know. What's the thought leaving here? Things are changing, absolutely changing. I don't think that the smaller schools are going to become minor league, NCAA programs. Well, let me change that and say, what's so bad if they do become minor league NFL programs or NCAA programs? It kind of like baseball, right? Is kind of the assumption there. I don't think it's going to hurt some of these schools. I think some of these schools have struggled anyway. Rice has always been a Big 12 team that's always kind of struggled on where they would play and who, and they always were getting beat. And it was never fair to them. They never had the resources nor the kind of kids that they needed to be a national championship team currently. Now, back in their day, many, many years ago, they did win some national championships. So, but that's the evolution of the game. And to have teams and programs that change to be part of a system, there's always a role, and there's still can be a lot of pride and a lot of opportunity, especially when they have good kids come through their programs. I mean, I can almost see some of these smaller schools bragging about how great their program is to build kids into the next level, and it used to be, I mean, right now we brag about how we take our kids and they go off to the NFL and how many NFL players they've got in playing actively right now. You can do the same thing with minor league, kind of the minor league attitude of the smaller schools saying, hey, our kids go from here into the next level. And that might be going off to play for Utah or not Utah, Georgia or Texas or Michigan. So rules and traditions will still be in place in these schools. Sentiment will still run hard. I'm going to still be a proud orange blood. I don't have any problems supporting my Texas team, even in years when we lose. I feel like that's part of being a fan. I do think it is interesting. I love the way Leach kind of ends his story. Talks about the branding, right? And the Pop Tarts and the Duke's Mayo and Cheez-It brands that are all wacky and kind of a part of the bowl games. I kind of like that. I thought it was kind of different, interesting. It was kind of fun. I don't know about eating a Pop Tart at the end of the game. That was a little over the top, but hey, I'll remember that was the year that I watched the Pop Tart get eaten. That's just branding. That's just marketing. Those things happen, and it's okay. That's where the dollars are, and it's good for those things to happen. It keeps people interested and keeps people. I mean, if the money's coming in through those promotionals, then more to them. It just adds more money in the bucket. These universities should be glad that these brands are excited to be a part of the program and be a part of the messaging that's going out to the audience, TV audiences.
Bring your family together with a backyard game court from Sport Court of Austin. Moms love Sport Court because it's an active and safe place for the kids to gather. Dads love Sport Court because he gets to play like a kid again. Kids love Sport Court because all kids love to play. So give your kids a safe place to hang out and have fun. Call 512-335-9779 or go to sportcourtofaustin.com for more information. If you build it, they will play.